Please call the roll.
Mayor Williams.
I'm here.
Councilmember Wright.
Here.
Councilmember Clay.
Here.
Councilmember Robinson.
Here.
Councilmember Siemens. Councilmember Sniffer.
Here.
Councilmember Schultz.
Here.
I wanted to,
Terry's at a family function. We'll probably.
it sounds like Councilmember Siemens will not be here this evening. I just wanted to make a couple quick comments. I'll start with the good news and I'll end with the bad. The good news is I was here yesterday to voices from afar. I was here yesterday and participated in signing all the bond work for the state pension fund payoff. So that has all been completed, and I believe we've got the money, and it's been paid off, and that's all finished. And the other thing is, I went to the first day of my two-day meeting today, which was the Chesapeake Bay Local Government Advisory Committee, and it was field trip day for Earth Day. And in addition to going down to the mall and participating in some of the Earth Day events down on the mall, we also went to the National Building Museum and got to talk with their staff who are in the process of putting together a green community teaching kit, which should be available sometime toward maybe this fall, and it's aimed at 5th through 8th graders, and I just wanted to make people aware of it. It's a fascinating way to introduce students to concepts of planning, and it gets at all kinds of things, and I thought it might be interesting if we contact local schools and make sure they know it's going to be available. It's a wonderful teaching tool. It's something that, from the looks of it, might even be good for adults to understand some of the issues around planning. So that was all pretty fascinating, and we got a chance to provide comments about how to make it a little more real-world friendly and quite interesting. There was also a great craft exhibit at the National Building Museum that I did not have time to go to. I was tempted to play hooky and go there. And the other news that I got while there was a call from County Council member Valerie Irvin telling me that she was about to attend a meeting at 1:30 in Rockville where the county executive proposed how he was going to deal with the additional $124 million shortfall that the county is facing. And part of that proposal from the county executive is to reduce the municipal rebates an additional 20%. And that means for Tacoma Park about $600,000.
How much?
$600,000. So we're going to need to have some conversations with our county council members, particularly first, members of the Management Fiscal Policy Committee, and that is chaired by Councilmember Trachtenberg, and the members are Councilmembers Irvin and Navarro. So,
What's the process for secession?
yeah. And so we will just need to try and prevent that from happening. If we are unsuccessful, we'll have to find another $600,000 to cut from our budget that we're considering. So I just thought people would want to know that. Are there any other council comments? Councilmember Clay.
You kind of threw me for a loop there, though. I sort of pull myself together here. I want to thank the Public Works Department for painting new stripes on the crosswalks and speed bumps in the area around Jackson and Lincoln and Boyd. That's very helpful. I note that we have to do that relatively frequently, and I wonder if at some point we could talk about the thermal plastic, and I don't know if that's an eligible expense with our speed camera fund. It is a pedestrian safety thing, and I think it would really help the visibility a lot of the crosswalks, and I think it's worth looking at. A couple things in Long Branch, Sligo, also from the Department of Public Works. Starting on Monday, Public Works is going to be replacing non-compliant curb ramps and sidewalks along Flower Avenue between Carroll Avenue and Garland Avenue. They're going to focus on the ramps, but they're also going to be replacing damaged sidewalks or areas where the sidewalk slope exceeds the limits. So I'll put a notice out on the listserv about that tonight. And then also on Tuesday, an asphalt crew is going to repave Palmer Lane.
Repave what?
Repave Palmer Lane.
Or do you mean pave Palmer Lane?
Well, actually, it's repave it,
It's sort of paved.
sort of.
I mean,
Famous
If rubble and rock comes down. Yeah, absolutely.
it was paved in somebody's memory.
So I just wanted to announce those couple of things.
Anybody else? Councilmember White.
Couple items. One, I want to thank the police department for their rapid response. In North Tacoma, there was some teenagers at home during the day and thought they heard some strange noises and were concerned, and the police were there. The parents said the police were there right away. The police were greeted by the teenagers who happened to be fencers as their recreational sport, and the teenagers had their, I think they're called foils out. So the police were very impressed with that also, but I appreciate the quick response. Two items related to the basketball court. One is there seems to be some confusion, even in my own mind, whether the basketball court that's being built by the side of the community center is going to be open in the evening. And I've heard sort of mixed. I remember when we discussed it, I thought part of the point was it would give kids a place to have evening activity up to a certain time, and that there were some lights on the side of the building that might facilitate that. But the message that some of the residents, because they're concerned about that, got from the recreation department was that the basketball court would only be open when the recreation department was open, and that the court would be locked in the evening. So I'm not quite sure what the plan is there, and I think again the residents there have a lot of concern about the basketball court because there is a history of kids coming down from the middle school and hanging out at the turnaround or further up and causing problems at houses and that sort of stuff. So I think they have a very legitimate concern, and they've requested to have a meeting with Deborah and me and probably someone from your office.
It would be Eric Rush.
Eric. Well, I think it might be good to have your office there because you guys are overseeing the installation and fence and all that sort of stuff. So it might be helpful to have someone from your office, whoever's overseeing that, or there as well to answer any of the construction questions. The second thing related to Hodges Heights and the basketball court is that in years in the past we've had, I think it's either $2,000 or $2,500 in the budget for when the park is redone and the turnaround is finished to create the visual screen there, and I wanted to make sure that that money either is in the budget or will be fundable out of some source of money that we have, because the park is supposed to be actually done this year still. I think it's still on track and still in the CIP.
Yes.
Yeah.
When it's actually done for us to be able to do that, I'm not sure it's going to be within the next fiscal year. It will be near the end of that, my guess is, but
Okay.
it's certainly still part of the plan.
Okay. Great. I had an item related to crosswalks also, which is, as of last weekend, I think it was still true. And I know on Carroll Avenue there was, or it wasn't confusion, but there was some stuff we were supposed to paint and some stuff that States Highway was supposed to paint. There's a crosswalk that goes, it's not at a light, it basically is, runs from sort of the pavilion little area right across to like in front of Amano basically. There's curb cuts there, there's handicap ramps, and it hasn't been repainted. And so it's just a little bit hazardous because I think residents who would walk across there, it's clear that it's a place to walk and people are used to it because there's handicap cuts, but there's no nice big white thermoplast crosswalk to make it clear that to drivers that people might be walking out into the street. And I can't remember whether there was a paddle thing there at one point or not. I can't remember. So if we could just. And then lastly, I had a question. I know in the past we've talked about this. There was a budget item for the grinder paver thing, and I couldn't remember if we actually bought that thing last year or not.
It was actually included in this year's budget. Councilmember Wright Darrell and I talked about it and just elected to defer purchase given the construction that is pending for Public Works. We didn't want to have one more big piece of equipment to try to figure out where to put while everything was being ripped up. So if you look in the CIP, we actually moved it to FY12.
Okay.
I believe it was 12.
I was just curious because I was thinking there's some places around the city where I might be able to use it. Thank you.
Councilmember Robinson.
I want to note that the Tacoma Junction area is kind of heating up from a perspective of local interest. It's been a long heat, going back decades, I guess you'd say. I know we're going to hear from them, and the notion of a task force will come up sometime soon. Is it next Monday? I think so. Maybe I got that wrong. Anyway.
It might be a week after that.
All right. Well, it's coming up soon.
Yeah,
And there are a couple of properties at the top of the hill that are vacant, have been vacant for a good long time, and are kind of ratty looking, and Earth Day's coming, and there's been a lot of talk about how to get the windows cleared up, and I appreciate that Code Enforcement Officer Margie Saccone is on that. Appreciate that she's working with the landlord on that one. Josh, you and I had talked a little bit about the parking meters on Laurel, and had asked recently when those were going to go from a half hour to an hour, something that had been requested last summer. I think it has been requested over the years. And not long after the summer, I know we passed we changed our legislation allowing for administrative oversight and change of parking meters. And I want to thank you, Sarah, for responding to our requests about that and saying that you're getting around to doing the administrative regulations and that they'll be presented to the city manager next week. Do I have that right? And that then you'll review those and settle on those, and then after that there will be a formal request that's necessary from ostensibly OTBA who wants to change the meters. So I'm a little peeved that it's taken a very long time, but I'm glad that things are moving along now. So I want to express my appreciation for that as well.
Anybody else? Councilmember Schultz.
I'd just like to draw the Department of Public Works' attention to a repair that I think they need to be aware of if they're not already, and that at the intersection of New Hampshire Avenue and Merwood, there's a bus shelter there, and there's a crosswalk on the uphill north side of that intersection that takes you across to the Tacoma Overlook. And I guess during the snowstorms, two things happened. One, the curb there got pretty much demolished by perhaps a front-end loader or something. But strangely, and I'm hoping that might get repaired under the contract that's causing the repaving of the street in the first place. But more importantly, the don't walk signal got knocked askew. So it tends to point not in the direction where it can be seen by pedestrians. And I don't know, I guess in my fantasies I just imagined that one day it would be fixed. And I began to realize that that's not the way it happens. So I'd like to see if somebody can follow up with that and at least get the crosswalk light fixture. It's kind of bent and twisted at the same time. I have no idea how it happened. That's the only thing on my plate.
Anybody else? Thank you, Councilmember Summer. Showed admirable restraint. Time for public comment. I'm not sure I see any member of the public unless staff counts.
They're just invisible.
I'll call for public comment, but
Maybe you should yell.
I'll just say it. Seeing no public comment, does the city manager have any comments?
The only thing I wanted just to add is a follow-up to the mayor's comments about the proposed further reduction in tax duplication payments. So Suzanne and I were talking about that today because I got notified while I was in Rockville this morning. We'll put together some thoughts for the council that you may want to use in your discussions with county council members. And I think we sent over some information today regarding the library aid payment. I think it's going out, Susie, in the HHS agenda packet.
Yes, for Mondays.
Right, so we followed up on.
HHS discussion
Right.
is on Monday.
And that's it.
Okay, thank you. We'll move along to our budget work session. And the first discussion is housing and community development.
The Community Development Department consists of 6 different divisions with discrete budgets. Our overall budget is $1.3 million, which this year, with the various reductions that have been made, is roughly 6% less than it was last year. We've also are being impacted by the layoffs that have been proposed for FY11, and we'll be losing 2 positions in the planning department. An internship position has been eliminated, and one of our community development specialists is, that position will be eliminated as well. And then our landlord-tenant division, one of our full-time staff members will be going to part-time. So basically what the net impact of this is that, we're pretty much scaling back to essential services, to some of the core services that we provide. There are very few special projects that we're proposing. Grant funds have basically dried up, so a lot of the projects that you've seen us undertake in the last 3 years or so, we're closing them out, and that'll be it. What I'd like to do is just kind of give you a quick overview of the general areas and then answer any questions you might have. A lot of the information is included in the memorandum that was in your agenda packet, as well as the attachment that we provided, giving some additional detail regarding the programming. In the code enforcement area, we have a budget of roughly $440,000, which is a 7% reduction from last year. We have 3 full-time equivalents, or 3 full-time positions in that division, and there have been no staffing changes in that area for next year. We'll be continuing to do our property maintenance code enforcement efforts, responding to both complaints as well as proactive inspections that are initiated during our targeted inspection program. We'll be continuing our rental housing license program in partnership with the Montgomery County Department of Code Enforcement, which conducts our inspections for us. And then there is a small amount of money set aside for clean and liens and major abatement projects. In the housing area, which consists of 3 separate budgets or general activities, landlord, tenant, COLTA, and affordable housing, their combined budgets are $316,000, which is a 10% reduction from last year, or from this fiscal year. And again, we're reducing staffing in that area, moving 1 full-time position to a part-time position. What this will do is we'll be able to continue our basic services in terms of mediating landlord and tenant disputes and administering and enforcing the rent stabilization law. We'll be able to continue, albeit at a lesser degree, the workshops and seminars that we offer to landlords and tenants. our capacity building initiative, which the funding for that has been cut about 35%, and then our ongoing support of affordable housing efforts, though again at a reduced level. In the planning or community development area, the total budget there is $407,000 roughly. It's a 6% reduction from this current fiscal year and 11% reduction in staff. So we'll have basically 3 FTEs spread out over 4 people in that particular area. We'll be continuing our basic services in terms of development review, implementation and promotion of the sector plans and the concept plans that have been developed for Long Branch, New Hampshire Avenue, and the Tacoma-Langley area, and we'll be continuing our outreach to small businesses, as well as the support that we provide to the business associations, specifically the Tacoma-Langley Crossroads CDA and the Old Tacoma Business Association or Main Street Tacoma programs. We have a variety of committees that we provide staff support to, including the Facade Advisory Board, the Arts and Humanities Commission, and the Washington Adventist Hospital Land Use Committee. So those activities will continue. And there's a small amount of money set aside for the maintenance of the various streetscape improvements that we've undertaken this last year and a half. That's intended to get them established, and then after that, I think next year is the last year that we're planning on doing the watering and weeding until they're well established, and they're designed to sort of maintain themselves after that point. And then we have some grants administration. We will not be continuing our neighborhood traffic calming projects. We've not included the survival guide or the business directory in the budget. Some of our community and neighborhood projects, or some projects that are initiated by various community or neighborhood groups, we will not be providing staff support to. We'll be backing off dramatically on the New Hampshire Avenue corridor enhancements, again, because of the lack of grant funds that are provided for that. And some of the capital projects that we've undertaken this last year or two that have been funded with the Community Development Block Grant Program, we will not be continuing. The two grant-funded two projects that we are proposing to continue are the Safe Routes to School program. We have $186,000 in grant funds that have been awarded for that will need to be expended by the end of the calendar year. Roughly 20,000 of that are for operating or programming costs, with the balance being sidewalks improvements. We're also proposing the continuation of the community gardens or the greening effort, and we have $10,000 set aside for that. Our budgets include a continuation of the operating subsidy for Old Tacoma Business Association at a level of $30,000, and then 2 new projects that are proposed, one of which is grant funded, is the Piney Branch Site Improvement Project, which is up at the corner of Flower and Piney Branch by where the Beijing Delight project is. And then we've proposed out of general funds the undertaking of a citywide market study or customer intercept study. So those are the basic highlights of my budget. If you have any questions, I'll be glad to answer them for you.
Okay, I'd like to start off with 2 questions. One of them is if you can just spend a minute talking about the $5,000 for the clean and lean, since there were some questions that came up recently about potential areas for doing that, and I wanted to make sure we understand how that process would work, this money and what this money would go toward, because I had the sense that people were thinking that there was an ability to put money into that type of operation, and I'm wondering if this 5,000 kind of is a first phase in doing something that then there's additional monies to do, or whether this is it.
We have in our budget this year $7,000 for clean and leans, which are small projects. You know, we've used the money for mowing somebody's yard, hauling away trash and debris, installing a fence to block off a dangerous area, boarding up windows or something like that. So the clean and lean from our perspective, for at least for this funding that is set aside, are basically for the minor nuisance things where, you know, just We send Public Works out there or get a contractor to go out there and clean the yard up because
With
nobody's doing anything
with no
with it.
expectation of reimbursement?
No, we always bill the property owner. They get late fee payments if they haven't paid within the established timeframes. A lien is placed against their property. A lien is not the right word. It's placed on their property tax bill. So if they don't pay their property taxes, and again, if they don't, they qualify for a tax sale, then it goes for tax foreclosure.
So that this is small amounts that potentially, if they don't pay, could lead to tax sale?
Yeah.
And what about bigger amounts if there were something to be fixed up in a neighborhood
We
and
have-
involving more than the 5,000 and with, gee, do it, put a lien on it and get the money back? And
We have 30,000 included in that for what we call abatement efforts. And those are significantly larger projects. To date, this year, we've spent $13,000, $14,000 to demolish a property on Allegheny Avenue, which took us 2 or 3 years to get to a point where we could actually demolish it. It's for projects like that. Retarping projects like on the property on Sycamore Avenue, for example, will probably come out of the clean and lean line, and that's $3,000 to $4,000 to do that, which is a temporary fix. Fixing the roof would be significantly larger. Roof repairs, for example, would come out of the abatement fund, and frankly, $30,000 is just not enough to do a lot.
But there's those two pots.
We have those two pots, and there's the difference between, or the distinction between how we anticipate spending them.
Okay. I just figured it would be helpful to get a little clarification on how we do that, because it sounds like there's some expectations that may or may not be able to be addressed by those pots of money.
The expectations that have been discussed at the community level are fairly significant in cost. So if we were to get to a point, for example, where one of the properties that has been condemned that's in a historic district would require us to get a structural engineer to come out and determine that it wasn't structurally sound and then had to be demolished. If that wasn't, if their report was not supportive of that inclusion or conclusion, or if the Historic Preservation Commission did not support the findings of the engineer, we'd have to go back out through and hire an architect to do a scope of work that would restore the property or renovate it so that it complied with the historic preservation guidelines for the area. And those costs we are anticipating would be significantly higher than $30,000. The one in Dan's ward, for example, preliminary cost estimates I've seen from people are anywhere from $150,000 to $300,000 to do it right. Yeah. No, Philadelphia. Oh, I'm sorry, it's your backyard, your ward, yeah. The line is fuzzy at times.
Yeah. And so you said the 160 was for what? The architectural assessment and the rehab?
We've had some community members who are interested in that particular property give me a sort of a ballpark what it would be to get the property so it was habitable again, and they range from $150,000 to $300,000. So if you were to go ahead and say, okay, we're going to abate this problem, we're going to take this property and make it habitable again, we would come back to you and say, we need $300,000. I'm just picking a number out of the air. If you want us to spend it, we'll go spend it, then we'll bill the property owner for it, put a lien on their property. When it goes to tax foreclosure or tax sale, then it would be reimbursed.
And that's potentially years down the road,
That is a possibility, yes.
so that an expenditure would be, we would potentially be out an expenditure over a period of some years.
Correct, which is one of the reasons why we take it as far as we can through the court process in the hopes that at some point in time the property owner will assume responsibility for their property, or we just wear them down when they decide to sell it. I mean, we haven't always been successful with that approach, and it does take time, but we
Okay,
try.
fine. Thank you. The other question I had was on the Community Development Division, and basically that's where you're reducing FTEs by a third of a position, And as I looked at what happens in that division, I thought, gee, that's all the stuff that we tend to put a lot of thought and concern into, economic development, site and building improvements, neighborhood improvements, community development projects, partnering with the local business community and other public entities to advocate for, preserve, and create attractive and viable commercial areas, promotion, redevelopment of New Hampshire Avenue, Safe Routes to Schools program.
We will be scaling back all of those activities.
This particular position also tended to do a lot of grant-related
Right,
project
grant-
work.
yeah.
And those grants have dried up, basically, so.
Yeah,
So-
which ties back to the.
I can understand the grants drying up, and therefore that's a good place to cut a part of the position. It also just leaves me feeling like, but that's the area where it's like we, the council, always seem to find a lot of things that we and our constituents really care about that fall into that area. And it puts you in a position of saying, I just don't have the staff to do that.
That is correct. Right now, my planning staff works an inordinate amount of overtime and comp time. And that's not including the hours that they don't put on the books. Plus, we have some very dedicated part-time folks that have these many hours, and if it takes a little longer than that, they just write it off. So, and we're looking at one of the staff members taking extended leave this fall. So we will be scaling back some of our projects, particularly in that area. A lot of it has to do with the grants, but the other is that some of the projects we've been able to underdo have been very intensive, and I just keep having people burn themselves off at both ends of the candle. That was a really bad analogy, but you know what I mean.
Burnout.
Burnout.
I'm not sure what the solution is, but I wanted to point out that conundrum.
Yeah, it is. It's tricky.
Thank you. Other questions? Councilmember Wright.
So I would just echo the mayor's comments as you described what is going to go on in the division and the reductions in budget and what that would mean for our capability. It really is hard to take. I understand the financial situation for the city, and we have to make cuts somewhere, but those are, I think, the things we have prioritized, and I think as a city, it's imperative that we have a strong business community and retail shops, and that'll help with the tax base. So I'm not faulting you, it's just a
And
challenge.
we will
I
be continuing
sympathize
those
with
to
you.
the best of our ability.
Yeah.
I mean, the one-on-one business support we'll be continuing to do, falling within the regular hours and things like that. Continuing to work with developers that express an interest in locating or expanding their property holdings in Tacoma Park. We'll continue to work with the residents and keep them advised as far as what's going on, what the sector plans and the concept plans mean for them, what progress is being made, things like that. So we're not just shutting down.
No, I know, it's just, it's many of the...
It might look a little different next year than it does now.
So one question I had that was a little confusing to me was a specific question. When I looked in the admin section, I noticed that there was proposed, under the FTEs, there's Director of Housing and Community Development, 40% of a person, which is you, I assume.
Yep.
And then when I go back and I look in the Community Development Division, yes, I noticed Director of Housing and Community Development, and there's a full person there. So I know that you're like very talented and you're
I actually not that many hours, but yeah, at least.
But we have like 140% of the person.
You know what?
So I think there's,
Yeah,
Should it be
it's supposed to be
0.6 there?
.6. Thank you very much. There are a couple of typos that have been, we'll add that to the list.
okay,
Though I do work that many hours. You want to know the reality of it.
I know.
Don't look at Sarah.
A nap would be really nice every now and then. A nap would be good.
I had a question about the code enforcement people. And in particular, I'm curious about how much, there's 3 people, right? There's the code enforcement supervisor, the inspector, and the administrative assistant. What percentage of those people's time is actually out in the field? Because I think the chief really prioritized, and I think this was the right decision, officers on the street, either detectives or patrolmen. And I sort of have a similar question here. Like, I think that should be the focus, and I've heard mixed things anecdotally over the years about who does what and how much time is actually out there. So I wanted to just get away from the anecdotes and make sure I'm clear on, of those 3 people, how much time did they actually spend out writing code enforcement violations?
The administrative assistant is a clerical position.
Okay.
Every now and then, we give him a break, and he goes out with the inspector and hauls down signs. It's kind of so he's out occasionally, but that's not his primary function.
And what does the clerical position do?
That's the administrative assistant position.
Yeah, but what do they actually? What happens in the process of code enforcement that you need a clerical? I'm trying to understand what.
Oh, there's
lots of
all
paper.
the paper. You wouldn't believe all the paper.
Yeah.
Okay.
They do all of the processing of the rental housing licenses. They do all of the certificate of, or the notice of violations. They process all of the citations. They answer the phone. I mean, if you look at
But
some
if
of
they're
the
doing-
board stuff.
If they're doing the rental license stuff, that's not in code enforcement.
Yes, it is.
Yes,
Oh,
it
it
is.
is, okay.
Yeah. So they do all of that, plus they deal with all the walk-ins. There are only full-time clerical reception person for the department, so they deal with a lot of things outside of the department, but they're busy all the time. The code enforcement inspector is, his sole responsibility is inspecting properties, but that doesn't mean he's out on the street all day, every day, because there is about, for every inspection that's done, the paperwork can involve an hour to 3 hours, just in terms of documenting what was identified, following up on the correspondence, or tracking it in our database, issuing notices of citations, etc. And then the code enforcement supervisor, I'll have to go back and check my notes, but I'd say roughly 60% of her time is overseeing all of that, plus managing the rental housing licensing program and working with the county and dealing with the community or the public for walk-ins and telephone calls and things like that. And then she also does inspections, but it's to a lesser extent. So we have basically, in terms of an inspector out on the street, I'd say it's about 1.4 FTEs.
Okay, great. Then I want to switch a little bit to the clean and lean and abatement stuff. So did we, I guess we had similar numbers in last year's budget. Did we spend all, or will we spend all of that money?
We had a carryover from FY09 because of some timing in terms of getting bids and getting court authorization to proceed on projects. We'll be spending roughly $15,000. I can't give you the numbers exactly, because we're getting quotes on some of the tarping that we need to do that might fall into that category. I'd say we spent the $15,000 for the demolition of the property on Allegheny. We're probably looking at another 10 for just tarping rows, and
I think for, if I may,
I don't know.
correct me if I'm wrong, I think
I
for,
hate to hesitate to.
yeah, I don't know the exact number. For this fiscal year, Tara is correct, we had carried over some funding from FY09. I think there was a lot of uncertainty if we were going to be able to move forward and do anything with 36 Philadelphia. That was Edith's property and Councilmember Robinson's ward. No, the other one, Sycamore. And so I think this year, given that those situations still seem to be dragging on, what we elected to do was to actually take the funding back to what the annual level typically has been without the rollover funding. And if anything cuts loose on those more problematic properties, that would be more expensive. Our thinking was that we could always just come back to the council and do a budget amendment rather than carry a bunch of funding that may or may not be used.
And does this, where do we keep track of this, right? So, because presumably we're spending the money, and then at some point in the future, we get paid back the money. I'm sure there's some lag effect, but do we keep track of it anywhere, like in a separate, because it would be interesting to know, because it might say that we actually, if we knew that it was like a 2-year payback period, normally we might actually decide we want to spend more money in the short term, because we're just going to get it back and not that far off into the future, so.
I can't, Yolanda might be able to help me out, I can't specifically address what happens with housing, property maintenance-related violations, because we don't have a lot of experience. We do the same process in terms of people who are delinquent on rental housing licenses, their sanitation, solid waste payments, and particularly stormwater. We've been doing that for a number of years. And we do track what comes back through the property tax bills, because the revenue has to actually be separated from the property tax and booked someplace else. Yolanda might have a better idea because it comes through her office.
Any bills that are sent out for that purpose is maintained by finance. And if we don't receive collections, we send out a follow-up notice and then eventually threaten that we will submit it to the county for collections. And we only had a problem with one person since I've been here, where it ended up on his tax bill and he ended up paying it. But most of the time, the payment is made within a couple of months.
Is that true for like Allegheny also, or does that end up on the?
That's another one of those absent property owners.
So it must end up on the tax bill then.
Right. The counties, I mean, I know when Yolanda and I both first arrived, we were doing a lot of work on stormwater because the city's collection efforts, quite frankly, had been lacking for a number of years. The county's preference is to deal with these things more through the property tax bills rather than placing a lien on the property or threatening to go through tax sale. And actually that works better for the city because obviously if they don't pay their property tax bill, the turnaround time is much quicker in terms of the city getting its funding back.
But it doesn't go in a separate fund or anything like that. It just goes back in the
Yes, it's the general fund revenue.
Okay. Might be interesting to think about if we want to do that differently.
Can I ask a follow-up?
Sure.
I thought you asked something slightly different, actually. I thought you were asking whether there was tracking of, so you spend $5,000 and do you keep track and match up, reconcile essentially those amounts? No.
It would be tracked separately because there's a line item on a property tax bill if there is some sort of, I don't know what they call it, like a special Tacoma or something like that on the bills. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think that gets booked to the property tax line item. It gets booked as to a separate revenue account. Is that correct?
It gets booked to whatever account that it was, if it was stormwater or license or municipal infractions.
So there would be an accounting transaction in response to your question, Councilmember Snipper, that we would know where to book that. I don't know if I'm answering your question, but it has to be pulled apart when the payment is received, and so that is, it's watched.
So it sounds like, from all of this questioning, that there's the potential that if we wanted to spend more to get a property more fixed up, that we could potentially bill that to their property tax, not send it to tax sale, and get the money back more quickly, and therefore, if we were putting more money out, we wouldn't be setting ourselves up for a long payback period. It sounds like there's the potential for that.
It is put on the property tax bill now if it is not paid within a certain time frame. Usually the county asks for the data to be submitted, I think, more or less around May 1st, May 15th. It's coming up pretty soon.
May.
Yeah.
And then
It's May 1st because they want everything for the tax bill by the end of May.
Right, and then it becomes if they fail to pay any portion of their property tax bill, that's when the property could potentially be put up for tax sale.
But is there Was I getting it, the point?
Yeah, 'cause
But-
I
and
think-
is there a dollar amount beyond which you have to make it a tax sale as opposed to saying, I don't know, maybe I'm splitting hairs here, but
That's
between-
all handled by the county. All we do is send them a list of delinquent accounts that we want them to follow up collections on.
Right, but if
And
we,
they initially, the first year, will put it on the tax bill. And at some point, the county makes the decision of whether to send the property to tax sale, because the person may also owe tax, property taxes in addition to the other miscellaneous bills that
right,
we.
but if we spent $50,000 on a single-family house and we said, you owe it, would that go on their tax bill?
Yes,
If it's delinquent.
if it's delinquent, yes. Yes, it
My
would.
my point is, like, if we were to track this, and I don't know, we don't want to set up another fund, but if you imagine we had like the delinquent properties fund, right, whatever you want to call it. If we track that and we had a good sense of like what's coming in, how long the payback is, we might actually, because my interpretation was, the payback might be like 10 years, so you don't want to do that. We'd have a better sense of the payback. If it's only like 2 or 3 years, I think there might actually be more of an appetite for doing more of these, rectifying the problem more quickly, and then, getting paid back through the property tax and then ultimately tax sale process.
Yeah, the arrangement we have with the county whereby any amount due to the city is placed on the tax bill is certainly much more desirable than what cities have historically done, or any governmental entity, and put a lien on the property, because the lien could sit there for decades,
Right.
literally.
Yeah.
So I do think the system that's in place now is
Yeah.
probably the best for the city in terms of getting a return of what it puts into a property.
Still not quite finished with this.
With that follow-up, go ahead.
I'm obviously not asking this quite right. So when you get the money from the county, does it say 200 XYZ Street, $2,000? Or do you just get a check for the whole stormwater stuff, or a check for the whole whatever stuff, so that you can crosswalk back this, let's call it a tax payment, through the tax system, property tax system, corresponds to what we billed them for, and we can now say that it's been cleared. Do you have that kind of reconciliation?
We get a list of the accounts that have been paid from the county, and then we use that list to post to our records.
So it does clear
It's
that person's
handled separately.
account.
They call it Special Tacoma Park, and those accounts are basically treated separate from the real property tax and the personal property tax.
But
But it's all included in the one payment that we get for property taxes.
it is detailed out, Councilmember Snipper, because that's what, we need that level of detail in order to accurately record the transactions in the city's own records.
So that you know that somebody has paid their,
Yes.
And we know what it's for. We get
Right,
the account
right.
number, the name, the address, the amount, the interest, any
So
other fees.
so then the only question is how difficult it is to come up with the time lapse to know, to have a sense of how quickly things get paid.
Going back or going forward? I mean, you
Yes.
actually-
Yolanda said that it usually gets paid in a couple months.
Yeah, usually when we invoice, the typical process is we will invoice somebody, and you would have a record of when those invoices are paid. So we could go back and probably look at those invoices that have been paid for the last year or so for any clean and lean. I mean, that's what you're interested in, is property maintenance.
There haven't been that many of them, but, we might have to send out maybe 2 notices, maybe, and before we get the collection, because there's a fee tack, a late fee tacked onto the
So
amount also.
if there's somebody there to pay attention, it gets their attention.
Yes,
Yes.
yeah. Especially when the third notice says that, it's going to be forwarded to the county for
it'll-
further collection.
Right.
Could result in the tax sale.
That usually
It gets someone's attention.
Yeah, so, to me, this goes back to, and I'm just using the Cedar Avenue, not the TARP, but the 7404 as the example.
because it was a problem the day I came into office, and I brought it up probably like 3 weeks after I was in office, right? So that's now 2.5 years. And I know we have some court processes to go through, but I'm sure the court processes to get to the point where we could do a clean and lean didn't take the 2.5 years, right? So, and if we could have just cleaned the property up, and it sounds like most of the time the person pays the bill themselves, and if not, it's pretty soon after the bill is going to get paid on those things. And in that time, we have very frustrated residents, right? So it just seems like it's an almost no-cost option to us to do it. I realize we'll probably get more complaints when people are unhappy that they were forced to pay a bill because they didn't do X, Y, or Z, but...
And in the process, do we save staff and legal costs?
Right.
I think Councilmember Wright probably just hit on one of the things that just in listening to the council, various council members over the 6 years I've been here, is I think there are sometimes different feelings about property maintenance and how aggressive you want the city to be. So I mean, I think that's a discussion we would welcome just to get a better understanding of, I guess, how quickly you want us to pull the trigger on someone, for lack of a better way of putting it. I mean,
Yeah, because one of the many properties you've been talking about recently, they're in the process of being foreclosed on. I mean, you know, there are all sorts of other extenuating circumstances that makes life challenging. My code enforcement staff, if you've met Margie Sicone, she is black and white. She's very good about working with people to see what is the best way to get something done. And so if there is a hope that we can find another funding source to offset the project or the costs incurred with painting the outside of the building, or getting the neighbors to come in and mow the lawn, or having Public Works come out and pick up stuff, I mean, she will do that. It's when we've explored all of those options, then we end up doing we still keep going through the court process, but then we'll end up doing okay, we're going to tarp your house and charge you $6,000.
I think I understand the point you're raising, Councilmember Wright, which is, perhaps that might solve the problem more quickly than going through the court process. I think one of the things we would want to avoid, though, is there is some incentive for someone in getting dragged into court, because what the last thing you want to do is have the city essentially become the entity that is maintaining someone's property, and I have seen that in some other localities where you almost effectively become the person who mows the lawn, and I don't know if that's the role the city should be playing, but ultimately I think that's a council policy decision.
So I think we spent enough time on it, but I think it was very helpful. I have one last question, and I know Councilmember Robinson is anxious to ask some questions. The market study, the $30,000, can I just have a little bit more sense of what that's for? Because we are talking about reducing staff in the same department. I'm kind of curious about it.
We're proposing to undertake a market study and a customer intercept study that would be used on a citywide basis to facilitate the expansion of existing businesses. For example, if we have someone whose sales have not done as well as they've done in the past, and they're looking at different ways that they can come up with a new business model, look at different goods that they're selling or different services they're providing. That would be helpful for that purposes in terms of here's the customer base that's available. These people are going somewhere else to get these goods. It's a good fit that might work with what you already have for your existing inventory or services. We're also looking at using it to provide some of the base information that a lot of developers or other businesses that are considering the community as a potential location, saying, here's the market, here are the incomes that are, here's the area income, if you go up in the New Hampshire Avenue area, for example, there's really a lot more money up there than you might think, given some general perceptions of the area. So that would validate that in terms of, yes, you can kind of come in and do a higher-end good or a higher-end business or space or housing, things like that. because the market study could support that. So what we're looking at doing is, there was a similar type of study done for the Old Tacoma Business Association area. It would be an expansion of that and would complement that, but it would apply on the city roads.
So it doesn't have anything, because I thought maybe it was connected to the city lot, this disposition of the city lot.
You know, it's a market study to see what the potential is, where the funds are being spent, what dollars are being lost to other areas that could be recaptured if new business were to come in. If it was conducted, and when we get to a point where the city is looking at marketing the city lot, it would be part of the information that would be provided, and it could be helpful in terms of targeting specific businesses or different types of development.
Almost didn't get that in before again. Because we're around.
Thank you, Josh, for bringing up some good points and kind of focuses. Just to, on the market study, it sounds like it would be citywide, except for Old Town, which has already been done. Is that?
Well, it would include, and you can't, it would
Not
include,
include-
there would be some duplication of data, but it would be, it would be expanded to include the rest of Tacoma Park and not be so specifically targeted on Old Tacoma businesses.
It would be all of Tacoma Park then?
Yes.
And the fear there is that since different areas are so different, that you'd get stretched out, and the consultant would say, well, Tacoma Langley is so different from Flower Piney, which is so different from Old Town, what do you want me to say? And having been involved with the one for Old Town, I remember the consultant focusing closely on Old Town, and for that 30,000, did a lot of work, did a lot of good work. I guess my fear there would be that you're trying to do too much on a small budget or something.
I mean, that's always a risk that we take. We have a lot of data and capability of collecting additional data that could supplement some of the information that was used by Randy Grossman when he was doing it.
Okay. I had two questions that are sort of follow-ups to Josh, but not quite. One is the degree to which your code enforcement department interacts and works with the police department and public works, because I know public comments and complaints come from folks, and sometimes they go to public works overhanging branches or street repair or so. To what extent are you guys on the same page, public works and police and code enforcement? I know that the
A
police.
majority of the complaints that come in are directed to the Code Enforcement Division. And we pull the ones out that apply to us and then refer them to Public Works Department if it's a Public Works issue, which could be a failure to pick up a bulk trash thing to overhanging branches. Police Department often gets complaints that are submitted to our office for cars that are illegally parked in the street or things like that. Things that are complaints that are focused on public property as opposed to private property.
So you concentrate on private property.
Our code enforcement stuff is solely limited to private property.
I see. Okay.
So we submit it to them through the GovQA system that tracks, and then we also call them or send them an email and say it's in the system, heads up, will you do that?
Okay.
We work closely with the police department when there are properties that have been condemned or vacated, and we ask them to keep them in the loop as far as when they go through and do their drive-bys, just to make sure that someone hasn't broken into the house or squatted there.
Okay. Last point is back to administration. I note that all the departments have a reduced budget, with the exception of administration, which seems to go up about 23% by reading it. And if I go to the administration page, I see that there is an administrative assistant 2. Is that the reason? I see all of the increase of $27,000 increases under wages and fringes for administration.
We've had some questions about coding. So basically, and that may be showing up here, Basically, there's no changes in staffing for the administrative section of this. It's 40% of my time, and then we have a part-time assistant, Martha Johnson, who many of you may have met, works 20 hours a week, and so there is no additional staffing goals at that.
This happened with police the other night. There was a 20% increase in the CI budget.
The CID.
CID, and there was like, wow, it must be the numbers, and it sounds like that's what's going on here. It must be the numbers. Kind of.
What happened with the administrative assistant, too, is there was a period of time
That's right, yeah.
where there was a vacancy, and so her time was actually being booked to a different division.
Okay.
And, I mean, we did notice this, the dollars as far as a department are fine. It's the allocation between the Code Enforcement Division and Administration that we need to go into the payroll system and see if she was reverted back to administration where she was budgeted. The issue with police is often that particularly when they have someone who suffers an on-duty injury, they will move people around between divisions based on workload demands and available staff. Sometimes what can end up happening, Councilmember Robinson, is where people were originally budgeted may not be where they end up working in a portion of the year because the department will reassign them to a different division.
I can understand that. I know that you can't always hit the budget numbers exactly.
We like
so
to.
forth. Yeah, so, but I appreciate the clarification.
Councilmember Snipper.
Thank you. I appreciate all the material that you've provided as well as the presentation this evening. I think lots of parts of housing are functioning really well, and it will be sad to see some of them reduced because it will inevitably mean reductions in service. I'm sure you'll do all you can to minimize the reductions in service, but it's inevitable that some of that will happen. I do have a couple of questions and concerns. I notice, I saw this before and I just didn't think about it this way, but I noticed that you have this online rent reporting system. Is that correct? Can you talk a little bit about, does the public have access to, for instance, could I look up and see if a particular property had a rental license or has been inspected or its rent is within the guidelines, or what can the public see in that system, if anything?
It's not online yet. We're in the process of doing the last of the tweaking as far as the information that's being submitted. We're hoping to, we're scheduled to do internal testing and training in May, and then opening it up for workshops for the community, primarily landlords, in June and July, with the intent of it being that beginning in FY11, everyone submits their annual rent reports online as opposed to faxing them or the hard paper copies. Recognizing that not everyone has access to the internet or is as techno-savvy as others, we're making arrangements to either walk them through it ourselves, get access to the computer lab center, things like that. The goal is to have people be able to look it up and get the property information online. How that will exactly work until I actually do it myself, but that's the intent. So it should be available to the public.
But it will be available to the public, so the idea would be that a tenant or a neighbor or somebody could find out, let's say a tenant could find out whether their unit has been, is licensed and...
Right, and they can do that now. We do periodic, we do random audits, if you will, different rental properties, notifying the tenants in writing, typically, and giving them a copy of the rent report, for example, and saying, here's what your landlord is reporting is the rent that's being charged to you. This is what the legal rent is. Call us and let us know if it's not right. So that information has always been available. It's public information. We're just hoping to make it more accessible.
A lot more accessible, yeah. Well, I'm very glad to hear that because I think it will address some of the issues I've heard from tenants who, are unclear about, just what's
All
going
they
on.
have to
and
do
so
is
on.
just call and say, can you tell me what the rent is supposed to be for this address, and we'll be glad to give it to them.
Yeah, it's just, many of them are reluctant to do that kind of call is the problem, and I'm hoping that an online system will encourage more of them to do it. Another question concerns the, I call them the weekly drive-bys. That's a particularly poor choice of words, I'm sure.
That's scary sounding.
I know, but I couldn't, in my notes, I couldn't think of what else to call them. I remember you saying that the staff go around the city looking for essentially potential problem properties. And so that's really what I'm after. So those are happening. Okay.
When you get the ward reports, for example, that we've been doing for the ward meetings, in the information for the code enforcement stuff, it talks about the targeted inspection program, and it references the courtesy notices, for example, which are door hangers saying, hi, stop by, notice that your yard is, or the grass is 2 feet tall and it can only be a foot tall. That'll give you some sense of the activity of the inspector when they're going out doing that type of program. So, and they do a lot of it. Last year we sent out over 400 courtesy notices and had over 600 inspections, subsequent inspections as a result of those ward inspection, or the proactive inspection process.
I still hear and see myself a fair amount of, say, trash or similar things. Properties poorly maintained, lawns that are big, high grass or whatever. Should folks call the department?
They can call the department, they can submit online, I believe it's anonymously, through the GovQA system, a complaint. Can they do that anonymously?
I think you have to give an email address.
Email address, okay.
Right, but it doesn't,
But
it goes
that's
only
it.
internally.
Yeah. So they can do it online, they don't even have to call us up, and submit it, and we'll go out. Do we miss things? Yeah, I mean, we do. There are some roads that tend to be more problematic, or streets that tend to be more problematic than others, so you kind of concentrate them, and others where, you could drive by it every day for the next 100 years, and there would never be a problem. So we do miss things, and people are encouraged to let us know, and we will follow up with it.
Do you drive into parking lots of rental?
The rental properties are all the responsibility of the Code Enforcement Division. So they are, at the county level. So we do not include rental properties on the list of properties that we inspect. It becomes confusing if you have two different entities
Right.
inspecting the same property. So we don't as a rule. So if there is a rental property, for example, that there is a complaint, that can also be filed online with us or the county. People can call, they can fax us, and we'll refer it over to the county and follow up with that. The reality is a lot of the code enforcement supervisor's time is just tracking stuff like that to make sure that the county has followed up and what the results are of the inspection.
Yeah, because the majority of what I hear are problems with rental properties.
Yeah, we don't proactively go out and inspect those. When we find something that is a problem, when we're driving by and it's very obvious, we do kick it over to the county. But those complaints can be filed online with us or with the county.
Yeah, I've seen the online county thing. I have a concern about how a particular property was handled. We had many discussions of the property on East Ridge, and I was very disappointed by the way it was handled. This was a property in which the tenants in this building, maintained by one of our less responsible landlords, or not maintained, were trying to do the right thing, and this landlord didn't have rental licenses. He was charging way too much rent. He said all kinds of things that really weren't true. And anyway, the tenants went to court. They got a court judgment. And then that alerted the city, and eventually the city had them evicted. Was not particularly handled very courteously, I thought. But it raised a concern for me that I think the focus needs to be on, in a situation like that in which essentially the landlord got everything the landlord wanted, even though the landlord hadn't fulfilled his part of the responsible ownership, and the tenants had. In the end, the landlord gets what he wants, the tenants don't. It was a very disappointing situation, and I hope that this won't happen again in the future. I hope that you have been able to think through alternative policies and procedures so that the tenants don't end up on the short end of the stick quite as badly as that particular example. That was a very extreme example.
If I might provide some background information on this particular project. This is a 6-unit building up in Councilmember Snipper's ward that was originally a rental property. The property was vacated. The landlord turned it and filed papers for a condominium conversion and went through and did all the renovation. Granite countertops. I mean, it's beautiful inside from what I've been told.
Yeah, it looked pretty nice.
And marketed it to a series of tenants with sort of rent with an option to buy kind of arrangement. While this was going on, the property owner became in arrears on a number of properties that he owns in Tacoma Park, and I'm assuming elsewhere, went through a nasty divorce, bought a Harley and moved to North Carolina or something like that, and basically walked away from the property. And the tenants living there called us and said, "Hey, we have no heat." We're going, "Well, it's the condominium, you have to talk to your condominium association because that's not something that we're responsible for." Which is why then we went out and sent the inspector and said, okay, it has to be a rental license property, and then did the check in terms of what they were paying for rent. The rents that they were being charged with this implied option to purchase the property were excessive, and Colton made a ruling whereby the tenants in the building basically did not have to pay rent for the landlord is given the opportunity of reimbursing them for all their overpaid rent, or the tenants could withhold rent for a period of time. For some of them it was 4 months, for others it was 8 months, I believe. So we have a property owner that has no money coming in, no revenue coming in, with a variety of different code violations and things like that, and no responsible party as far as managing the property. So one of the options we had, or we took a series of routes. Working with our capacity building program, we found a pro bono attorney that is representing the interests of those tenants. And they have managed to work out an agreement where the investors in the building have received a deed in lieu of foreclosure. And I think it may have been finalized not long ago. Because this is a rental property, or a property that's worth $400,000, and there's like $700,000 worth of debt on it. So it's bad all around. So we identified
a lot of those properties.
There are a lot of them. And his former wife would not release her part of that debt on that property. So we worked with the tenants to find a pro bono attorney to represent their interests in terms of making sure that they got reimbursed for their rent, or that they were allowed to live there for until the rent overpayment was recouped. They also worked with the property owner and the investors so that the investors could do this, so that the tenants would have an opportunity to purchase these properties. The in-sale price is in the low 100s, if it's that, which is a reasonable price for the size of the particular properties. Because we had to go through this process as far as the licensing thing and sending the notice to evict to these tenants, just so that we had some control over the property owner and some motivation for him to follow through, either make things right with the tenants or sell the property, etc. We did file in court and get authorization to close the building down. Everyone was notified with the understanding that we're just going to keep watching this, and as long as there's progress being made, we're not going to kick anybody out, because there was all sorts of implied problems that we made arrangements with the county to have unpaid utility bills paid. So we've spent a lot of time on that particular property. It was an ugly situation because of just the nature of the problem, and we don't do it very often. But to my knowledge, things have worked out right now.
Well, that's a positive spin on what happened.
It is what happened.
I appreciate your putting a positive spin on it. As you know, tenants, the landlord continued to try to rent that property and did in fact rent to additional tenants. When one of the units became free, he rented to some other folks,
Right.
charging them huge rents as well.
Yeah, we were monitoring it in partnership with the county on that particular property.
Yeah, I hope we can,
I'm hoping it never happens again. He has one property left that he owns, and then I'm hopeful that that will go away.
he has relatives too. Fortunately, not all of the relatives' properties are in Tacoma Park.
A couple of them.
Yeah, there are.
Yeah.
But anyway, I'll just leave it at that.
But that particular property was something that included a variety of different divisions within the Community Development Department budget. The relationship with the county as far as providing the rental inspections under contract, the capacity building program, landlord-tenant mediation services, and the code enforcement. So it was a multiple effort.
Any other budget questions? Councilmember Clay.
First, I wanted to thank you. It's obvious that you went through your budget with, I won't say a fine-tooth comb, but clearly you went through your budget and looked at all of the areas and came up with a budget reduction that preserved the core of activities, and I can tell you we're very thoughtful about it. Spent a lot of time on it, and I appreciate that. Wanted to make a comment about what you said about the rents. I suggested, I think last year, that once we figure out how to calculate the rents for everything in the city universally, that we put it on a postcard and mail it to the household of the person who rents that place, so that every year we mail them what their maximum rent is.
And that actually might be a possibility with this software.
Yeah, that's what
Yeah, that would be a great idea. I think they should know what their maximum is since we calculate it. So that's my thought on that. The code, spending our money, bringing people up to code, and then leaning their properties, that conversation started to make me uncomfortable. It sounded a little more aggressive than I really think the community would support. I think if we're talking about intractable properties, you guys are throwing out addresses, and I don't know what all of them are, but if we're just talking about properties, there's no one living there, the roof is caving in, I don't have a problem with that approach.
There aren't that many, and many of them are unoccupied.
Yeah, I just want to throw it out there that if we're talking about other code enforcement issues where we're going to spend $50,000 to fix up somebody's house and then send them a bill and then lien their property, I don't know, I'll turn it inside out or something here at the dais. That wouldn't be okay. So, long-time dilapidated properties, no one's living there, they've been practically abandoned, and that's okay. And the last comment is, a little bit related to your budget, but mostly a broader comment, which I mentioned before, is that I really think we should consider hiring a volunteer coordinator. I was listening to you talk about things that we're going to have to drop, and there are a few things in your budget, like helping people with business development, that we could get retired business people that could help do that. We might be able to get some expert volunteers to do some landlord-tenant stuff. I know of at least 3 former HUD people in the city, 2 of them in my ward, that would probably be well qualified to do that kind of thing.
We use a lot of volunteers now. A lot of the legal stuff with the landlord-tenant affairs thing is pro bono. The firm of Arnold Porter has been great to work with. The University of Howard University's law students are now getting involved in sort of representing the interests of tenants. And then the business community through the Small Business Development Center, and to a lesser extent, but they are helpful, the state of, or Montgomery County's Economic Development Department that focuses on smaller businesses have also done a lot of work for us without any costs associated. So believe me, we tap into a lot.
Right, it wasn't specific about you, but I'm just listening to you talk about it, and it sounds like, you do engage folks, and I heard you talking about the pro bono attorneys and everything, but I just think in general, I think it might behoove us at this point to think about having an actual volunteer coordinator, and maybe we could start with somebody who was part-time, but I suspect that it could cross over a number of activities that we might want support for, from community development to public works and gardening maintenance, to people who we might train to take a couple of volunteer shifts staffing the community center. I know there are people who have senior volunteers who do that. When I go to California and go to the bridge club, my mom plays bridge at a different community center literally every day of the week except Friday when she bowls. And so when you go in there, the people who greet you frequently, there's one staff person, and then they have other seniors who are actually there who are helping to answer questions and direct people and get people set up in what they're doing. So you talking about that and thinking about some of the things that we were going to drop also, that there might be some good volunteer opportunities there, brought that up again. Thank you very much.
Any other questions?
Yeah, if I may. Curious, in the rental housing licensing program, you have a bunch of performance measures and a lot of licenses issued, landlord certifications, seminars, exams, notices of violation issued. Who actually does all that?
Those 3 people.
Those 3 people? All right, okay. Then you talk about a contract with Montgomery County, which we pay $183,000 for the inspection of rental properties.
Correct.
Okay. Are we getting a bargain by having them do this? I presume we are, or else we wouldn't be doing it.
It's great. For that price, we get between 5 and 6 inspectors, and they're wonderful to work with, and there would be no way we could do that ourselves. Before we had this contract, we had 6 inspectors on staff.
Right.
Yeah.
We tried to do it ourselves.
Yeah, and for a variety of reasons, wasn't working out very well. So we had proposed entering into this contract with the county, and for what I consider to be a very good value, we got a lot of staff and a lot of support from the county through this effort.
Okay.
And they reduced their price last year, for this year.
Yeah, I'm so glad I got them to put it in writing when I was talking to them about it. The other ancillary benefits with that too is that we've developed a very positive working relationship with them, so they've been supportive in terms of providing funding for affordable housing projects, for paying utility bills that are unpaid, doing a lot of things that was more difficult to access before we developed this really working relationship.
Yeah, I mean, if you're getting that many people for $183,000, even if they were doing it, just not being really nice people, that would still be a tremendous part.
Yeah, they're good.
You do credit checks, it says here, under your landlord-tenant office. Whose credits are you checking?
It's one of the services that are provided to landlords. If they're a licensed rental property, they get one free credit check for tenants that are making an application to live in their home. And then we process it and through arrangement that we have with the county, where the county actually conducts the credit check for a very nominal cost. So the landlord just makes an application to us and then we process it, they pay for it. It's kind of a wash. The funding that's budgeted for that in the landlord-tenant fund is basically for that first free credit check.
So if they have like 4 units, they only get one of them free, and the rest they have to go out and buy themselves somewhere.
Well, the county will still process them. I think it's under $20.
Oh, okay.
So it's
Yeah, no, credit scores don't cost much. Do they actually, the landlord actually gets the credit report, or they just get a report of the credit report? I'm just curious, because that's
I've
a
seen
lot
the
of
faxes. The
confidential
faxes are
information.
6 or 7 pages long for each person. I haven't looked at
That's a credit report. You, in your opening remarks, mentioned several things that were going to be dropped or needed to be reduced in terms of activity, like stopping production of the survival guide, reducing some of the activity, planning activity on New Hampshire Avenue. I wanted to take some notes of what those were, the rest of them were. I was wondering if you could tell me.
The survival guide was identified as a potential cut because that information can be available online or electronically. The New Hampshire Avenue corridor projects, many of those have been funded with grant dollars. So there's just the natural, we're going to stop doing that because we don't have any money for it anymore.
In that regard, I went to testify down in Annapolis on the community legacy. Do we know what the state budget determined in terms of whether they were going to cut community legacy?
They didn't cut it, they actually increased it somewhat.
They did increase
I
it?
believe it. I don't think it was very much, but they didn't cut it.
Oh, good, I'll take credit for that.
You can take credit for that.
All right.
The other things that were just identified were just miscellaneous capital projects that have been funded either through the CIP program with city dollars or block grant, and then some of the traffic calming projects that we've been involved in.
You mentioned this $30,000 performance of market study. Is that what it's called? Where did the idea, or how did that get engendered?
It came about with conversations from a variety of developers who were trying to, interested in locating in Tacoma Park, specifically along the New Hampshire Avenue corridor. And it started out with, well, why would I want to locate there? And trying to develop tools or ways of promoting the area for redevelopment, and rather than, it's a great spot, you should really check it out.
Right.
It's a great spot, plus here's some information that could be helpful for you as you go through and evaluate the possibilities for it.
So,
It's also something that we, when we've been doing some of the one-on-ones with businesses in the community, it became apparent that it would be helpful for them if they've got this very small niche of goods and nobody's buying it, that they could possibly expand, and we're hopeful that that will help sort of facilitate that conversation as well.
do you know, has a consultant been selected?
This is for FY11, so we have not done anything.
Right. Okay.
If the proposal is adopted by the city council, we would then go through and issue a request for
Right, all right.
proposals. And,
So, okay, so it would be open to be determined, I guess. I think it sounds like a good idea.
I think it could be helpful. Yeah.
I noticed on that same page where the community development page, performance measures, looking from the kind of business meetings, tours, marketing events, and stuff like that, that there's been a general decrease in the numbers of most of those performance workload measures from 2008 to 2009 to 2010. Is that sort of reflective of the fact that just a lot of stuff that needed to get done has gotten done and don't need to continue to do certain things, or is it a reflection of there's not enough money to do everything you want to do right now?
It's kind of a combination of all of the above. I mean, it depends on what grants have been awarded to the city that we're responsible for overseeing. Some of it's the economy.
Right.
Some of it's initiatives that we've undertaken that require more involved community outreach, for example, than other projects. So a lot of it's work, or a lot of it's tied to the budget that is adopted by the city council each year,
Right.
and the goals that the city council establishes for the organization as a whole.
Okay. Well, if the community legacy program has been at least maintained at the same level as the current state fiscal year budget, is there any chance that we would be looking to try to get some additional grant money in the coming years
Yes.
out of that kitty?
Yeah. Yes.
Do you have ideas?
Oh, we always have ideas. We would bring them to the city council and chat with you about them. But it could be anything along New Hampshire Avenue corridor. It could be something in the Junction area as that project progresses.
Right.
It could be housing related. It could be a variety of things.
Okay. I don't think I have any more questions. I just think this is a good job. There's a lot of data here. So it helps to, it kind of shows the complexity of the department's work.
Thank you.
I just wanted to note that there are some projects related to housing and community development in both the capital improvement program as well as special revenue funds, just in case the council had any questions about those. While Sarah was here, I'm not trying to belabor this section of the agenda, but I did want...
If you have any questions, ask them at the break. We're taking a break.
Yeah, just as in the memo that's attached to Barb's cover memo, there's a detail, or there's an explanation of the special revenue projects that are included.
We'll take a break. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm going to become the tyrant.
Yeah, okay.
So let's move through it.
Well,
Say what you need to say, and I'm going to use the 3-minute timer on us.
Okay. I'll
Because we
basically
can't be here till 10:30.
try to let you know what's changed from the status quo in previous budgets. It's pretty much a flat budget in terms of dollar increase. However, there are reductions that have taken place in order to make that match happen, given the usual increase in salaries and fringe that's experienced from year to year. In terms of staffing related issues, we have reduced a part-time custodial position. This was done in tandem with the discussions about the closing of the facility on the weekends or Sundays, and so the decision was made to reduce a part-time, which was a 15-hour-a-week custodial position, as a result of that reduction in hours open of the building. We've also eliminated an intern for the city engineer and reduced the hours of an intern for the city arborist. We've reduced expenditures for temporary labor support, which for two of our divisions in particular, it really supplements our labor pool, both in the right-of-way division and in the gardens division. So the right-of-way division reduced their temporary labor dollars by $10,000, and the gardens division, we reduced temporary labor by $3,000. We actually reduced some funds in the tree maintenance
aspect, $15,000 reduction in the annual expenditure for tree maintenance, and that deals specifically with removals as well as our maintenance pruning program. We are making a change in our recycling program, which actually is kind of a win-win situation. When we first started the program, we had everybody's trash and recycling collected on the same day, which is, if you read any standard how-to set up a recycling program, that's what you want to do. Our program's success pretty much overwhelmed the capacity of our vehicles. Even when we had 2 vehicles, we had more recyclables than we could pick up if we kept the trash and recycling days matching citywide. So we expanded our recycling routes to 5 days a week. We kept our trash routes at 4 days a week. And of course, that 5th day, we have the yard waste pickup. So on Mondays right now, we pick up both yard waste as well as a Monday recycling zone. That Monday recycling collection is a little bit of each of the other trash zones days grouped on Monday. With the purchase of our new recycling truck, which is larger and has some compaction capacity, as well as the change to the single-stream recycling collection, we found pretty quickly that we have space left in our truck. So we're going to make the shift back to the 4-day-a-week recycling program. That'll enable everybody's trash and recycling day to be collected on the same day, so they won't have to remember Monday for recycling and whatever other day for trash. We'll be focusing our information about that just to the people that are affected, so that we don't confuse people who don't have any change to their program. But what that does is it results in a reduction in our overtime dollars for our sanitation division. Because as you may know, anytime a holiday happens on a Monday, we collect that day's route on the following day. Hence, the staff have their regular route to collect and the previous day's route to collect, and that's on an overtime basis. So with the reduction of that Monday recycling route, there'll be at least 4 days a week, 4 days a year, sometimes more, where we won't be collecting on overtime because we won't have that missed collection day. There are other holidays that fall on the regular days of the week, non-Monday days, and we'll still have the overtime for those. Let's see. The other change is a reduction in the number of weeks that we are proposing to provide leaf collection in the fall. We currently do a 7-week program. We took a hard look at that and tried to figure out what we could do in terms of cost savings. And so what we've got included in the budget is a 5-week program that primarily reduces our temporary labor costs, because that's a big bulk of the cost of our leaf vacuum program. So it's a reduction of about $12,500 to shift the program from 7 weeks to 5 weeks. And we have also tried to incorporate some savings in the budget in addition to the recycling shift, which I mentioned. We have also this year started self-hauling because we have the roll-off trailer, our own scrap metals, and that's resulted in tremendous savings for us in terms of hauling fees and dumpster charges. So those savings are carried over into the budget. That's pretty much what differs from the previous or current year to what's proposed for next year. If you have any questions or want to go through each division, we can do that.
Don't want to go through each division. Does anybody have any questions on the blue packet before we get into any questions in the book before we go to capital? Going once, going twice. Any questions in the blue? Okay, any questions in the budget book on the Public Works section? Councilmember Ray.
I just wanted to go to the CIP section.
We're going to get there in a second.
Okay, I thought that was part of the budget book, but.
No, the Public Works section of the book, that many pages. Okay, Councilmember Ray, capital.
So I just wanted to review, because this is where the big amount of money is for the Public Works renovation.
Well, vehicles and equipment for us as well.
So, sorry, there's no page numbers there, so it's, so I just want to be clear on, we've decided to fund 1/3 of it, sorry, 2/3 of it through debt and 1/3 through money from our reserve.
That's my recommendation, yes.
And will you refresh my memory on what's in this round of renovation? Is it everything, or what's?
It's not everything. We have a total of 5 buildings up at Public Works. In this renovation program, we'll be demoing and replacing one. We'll be gutting a section of another, a third of another, and we'll be renovating 2 others, and then there'll be an infill building. The parts of the facility that aren't addressed is the mechanics' work area. They will be getting a new maintenance storage area, and most of the right-of-way division, which currently has their equipment, their staff areas, and their storage. 2/3 of the facility will be heated with geothermal, or have HVAC provided, both heating and cooling through geothermal. The other third of the building will be on our old boiler system and won't be addressed, though we do have some funds in there for upgrading so we can improve the efficiency of that system. Some of the roofs will be need to be replaced on a as-needed cycle as they age. We're not at all addressing the fuel tank and the need to replace those sometime in the near future. What else is not being addressed?
What did you include in the bid alternates?
The bid alternates include some porous pavement for some of the parking areas. The bid alternate includes extending the geothermal into another section of the building. At this point, the base bid just calls for gutting where the mechanics are going to store their tires and belts and whatnot. Basically, they're just going to gut the old locker rooms. We're going to put our shelves in. It's pretty much going to be just a gutted space with lights and the heat that's there. So the bid alternate would be to, renovate that, change the HVAC system, improve the lights, change some openings. There's 4 bid alternates. The 4th bid alternate was to do an above-ground cistern. We've since decided that the cost is higher, and you add some additional operational issues with freezing and whatnot. So we're going to eliminate our bid alternate number 4. So I can't remember now what the 2nd and 3rd bid alternates are, but I can get back to you with that.
And we're not, I know at one point there was talk about contact with companies that would do solar.
Yeah, that's
where
still
there
working
would be
its way.
finance, but,
The credits.
yeah.
Yeah, through the mechanical engineering firm is still developing options on that. They've sent us, some information, but at this point, everything is just theoretical.
If I can just to follow up on Councilmember Wright's question about the financing, I did want to share with the council that we have typically borrowed through the local government infrastructure program, and I've had a number of conversations over the last few months with the administrator of the program. Obviously, with the problems in the credit market, and this is somewhat of a different animal, they have experienced some difficulty, kind of trying to structure everything. That program has typically relied on bond insurance instead of actually securing a rating from one of the rating agencies. You know anything about the bond insurance market? I mean, it's basically tanked. So there is a possibility that I may recommend to the council pursuing bank financing as opposed to going through that program. They're sort of at a critical stage in talking to a group that had a meeting with Moody's, and I plan to follow up with him next week to kind of see where things stand. But my worst concern is if the bids come in, they're only valid for a certain period of time, and if they have not been able to kind of work through the problems just because of the unusual structure of their program, then I want to proceed with getting some other options in terms of financing. So, just to let you know.
I just had one other question related to the vehicle stuff. So it looks like the street sweeper needs to be replaced.
Yes. beyond its useful life.
Right, and that was going to be, as a reminder, was going to be funded out of the Stormwater Management Fund.
And we pretty much have to do that.
It's part of the
Part of
permitting.
our NPDES permit, it's a standard practice for stormwater management.
And the trash truck money, is that, when you were saying the newer trucks, that's the money that's in here that we'll spend, or that's the truck we already bought?
The truck we already bought is a recycling vehicle. We'll be purchasing similar trash trucks as replacement vehicles. They'll both, they'll look very similar to our current new recycling truck.
Any other questions on capital? Any questions on stormwater?
This budget is pretty much, in terms of dollar figure-wise, of course, unchanged, I think, from the previous year. There was a reduction in the intern. That was actually for the city engineer, so not the stormwater budget. So that is pretty much in place. We do have some projects planned, capital expenditures planned, that will, at this point, they're tentative. There's not been any hard design work, and as we all know, things can change as we get into the new year. But currently, we're anticipating addressing long-standing stormwater problem at Garland. You all probably will know this more as the stream of water that flows across Carroll and Flower Avenue, the source of which is the Washington Adventist College. And they are actually in the process of expanding or renovating or building a music building on Greenwood Avenue.
Yes, knocking down the old one, building a new one.
So a component of our stormwater management plan for them and a critical piece of our permit is that we're making them address that longstanding problem in order to get a stormwater permit. It's across the street. The problem is they have a great deal of spring water, underground water that comes up through their facility that they pump out. And so what there is there's a storage place, for lack of a better word, on Greenwood Avenue, just a big brick hole in the ground where water comes in, and then there's no pipe to connect it, and so it just overflows, and that's why you have that constant stream of water 9-10 months a year down Greenwood Avenue, out Carroll Avenue, and across Flower Avenue. Causes incredible destruction of the road surface as well as ice and hazards. There's also another water problem on the other side of Carroll Avenue that's not being addressed. But the one on Greenwood, and what we've asked them to do is put a pipe under Greenwood Avenue, connect to an inlet on the other side, so that water now has a pipe to flow through, take the pipe back to through the middle of the block to the property where we have a right-of-way and an alleyway with a storm pipe that we will upgrade, renovate, and connect from the alley to Garland Avenue and then down to Carroll Avenue where there's a storm system that goes to Long Branch. So it's just a great opportunity to solve problems, and the city puts in its piece, and responsible party puts in their piece, so that's a goal for next year. There's also been a concern for a while. We've been doing a lot of work in Circle Woods in terms of invasives management. We're aware of a stream bed stabilization problem, a need there. We've got a lot of undercutting. It's actually a stormwater channel, but it used to be an old stream bed, a natural flowing stream bed, so we want to do some stabilization in that area. It now serves as a stormwater channel. And then we are looking at doing some environmental infiltration improvements at a piece of land that we own at Prince George's and Circle Avenue. It's a section of the area that, if you didn't know better, you'd think was somebody's private property, but it's actually owned by the city, and it currently has an outfall and an inlet there, so we'd like to open that up, create a sort of a more natural area, enhance the infiltration, and sort of improve the water quality through, getting it a little bit out of pipe and into the soil. So those are the three major capital projects. In addition to that, we'll also do what we do every year, the TV inspection and cleaning of the third of the system, outfall testing of our 15 or 17 dry water flow streams to monitor water quality. Any kind of emergency cleaning services. Occasionally we'll have an emergency stormwater problem. We'll bring our contractor out to do the cleaning. And sort of the general, those are the general programs that are normally funded through that.
Councilmember
I
Schwab.
just wanted to, I guess you finished the stormwater project over on Linden Avenue.
Almost. It's just about done. They've got to do some planting of the wetlands, and we are currently trying to figure out what we're going to do in terms of restoring some of the pavement that was impacted by just having the construction in the area.
You know, for something that is in a very obscure corner of the city of Tacoma Park that the vast majority of citizens are never going to see, it is a very, very nice job. And it looks like it was a very substantial job. I mean, it was a big project in order to get that thing under control. So I compliment.
It's got great before and after pictures.
Yeah, yeah. I was going to say, ask, you know, you're going to be replacing the leaf, the street sweeping, because is that going to be sort of a better technology or a more effective kind of street sweeper? Because I notice when it trundles on by, on my street,
It's showing its age.
doesn't seem to do much except blow stuff around a lot.
Yeah, we collect tremendous amount of debris, every day when it's out. So even though it looks like it may not be doing a lot, we get a tremendous amount of debris from the streets. I don't know yet whether we're going to change technology. We haven't really looked into what's available. Anything will be an improvement over the existing system, just because you've got a 10 or 12-year-old piece of equipment that gets used really hard when it gets used. I mean, it's kind of like a trash truck. It gets extensive use. You got a lot of contact with the roads and friction and moving parts, and the kind of material that it picks up, road salt, dirt, sand, it just wears a piece of equipment, a piece of metal out. So that machine is shot. So any machine will do better. There's some new technologies related to wetting and vacuums, the amount of suction and things like that. So we'll be looking at what other jurisdictions are using and what's kind of the latest, greatest down in the market. We'll be looking for good emissions in terms of...
Okay. Let me ask you, could you go over again, if you already did, because I was a minute late coming in, what, if any, services or programs might be reduced this year?
The biggest one for our budget will be the change in leaf collection from a 7-week program to a 5-week program. That's the thing
that one I caught.
That's going to interface, and people will be most aware of that, and we'll try to do a good job at notifying people that that's happening. How we envision that working is that instead of starting leaf collection in November, we usually start for second or third week in November, we'll start in December. So we'll actually do collection through December into the first week of January, and our emphasis will be on people getting your leaves raked in December, and then we'll have the last week of January to wrap up and go around and make sure we've got everyone. They'll see the collection truck less, no question about it. You take out 2 weeks of the program, you take out another cycle for us to get around the city. The other thing that will impact some of what we do, though it's more difficult to pinpoint, is the reduction in the temporary labor expenditures that we're making both in right-of-way and gardens will extend the time that it takes us to get a mowing cycle completed, crack filling operation done, anything that we use temps for. The less temps we have, the longer it may take us to get through our usual round of process. I don't think the reductions in the tree maintenance fund is going to be anything that anybody else is aware of other than us. It means that our maintenance pruning dollars will go a little less far. Our cycle will extend a little longer. So those are the ones that are going to have the biggest impact in terms of services.
Okay, Councilmember Wright has a follow-up question.
Just related to leaf collection, how does that 5 weeks compare to what the county does?
I'm not sure I don't know how long their collection runs. We can find out.
We have some experiences with that.
Well, I live a block out of the side of the city. We get 2 notices. We have 1 pickup, and it's always before my leaves have come down, and then there's a second pickup, and then for all the remaining leaves, you bag them. So there's, I'm sure the total overall time for the entire county, for the portion of the county that gets leaf collection, is, is fairly extensive, but it's essentially 2 pickups.
So I wonder, because we're doing a shorter period, because people have asked about this, and we've looked at this at different times, whether it would make sense to have designated, people to know that leaf collection happen at designated times. I know it can get tricky because if it rains or...
The added
extensive
cost you
experience with
have,
that.
the added cost you have is in posting, which requires a temporary labor. So basically, you use your labor doing the notification versus
But I wonder
actually on the street.
If we didn't post, instead if we put up, if we used the web to put up a map that showed highlighted sections of when your road, your place would be collected basically, and then it wouldn't be the cost of posting.
We could explore that. It definitely ties our hands in terms of flexibility. So if we have equipment issues or other issues, or we know that Holly Avenue is heavier than Hudson Avenue, we're scheduled. So it does lock us in a little bit. But, we do have the old maps and the old information and the old route sheets. We could develop it, though, again, it was a longer program than what we're proposing.
I just want, if no. Raise
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
Are we on a certain section of the budget?
We're about to finish with the budget.
Okay, one quick question. Is the city engineer half-time?
No, the city engineer is full-time. He's funded half-time in the city engineer, or the engineering budget, and half-time in the stormwater budget. There's also an administrative assistant who's funded half-time in the Public Works Administration, a quarter-time in the engineer, and a quarter-time in stormwater.
Okay, thank you. Anything else? Okay, final item, State Highway Administration proposed regarding the streets.
Yes. I think there's been some discussion on the council level about this. In the background, Suzanne and I met with the then director of the District 3 district engineer last year in June and expressed our frustration, confusion, head scratching as to what State Highway was doing, all of a sudden telling people that they needed to call the city for anything on 410 or on Ethan Allen Avenue when they'd always maintained it before. Long story short, that section of the roadway and a number of sections along 410 were city-owned roads. Historically, there's no question about it. The city established those roads. They were in the city at that time. Once the designation of Route 410 was established, I think State Highway just took over maintenance as it does in most of the other areas, until a point in time where funding became short and problematic for them, and then they started putting a very fine look at areas in their jurisdiction and basically stopped services in areas that they didn't own and maintain. So the proposal that State Highways presented to us through the now District 3 engineer, Brian Young, is to get a feel for how the city might consider a proposal that would provide the sections of 410, which are Ethan Allen from Elm to Carroll, and Philadelphia Avenue from Carroll to Maple, and then again from between Birch and Cedar to Chestnut. Those are the three sections that are considered city-owned, basically to do a trade where they would say, okay, they're ours, no more back and forth about it, and you guys, the city, take Flower Avenue. That is currently a kind of dislocated section for State Highway. It's a very odd location for them. They have Flower Avenue from Piney Branch to Carroll. It's discontinuous other than it connects to Carroll Avenue. It isn't part of a route like 410 is, so it's a section that they'd rather not deal with. We left the place blank. It's about 2/10 of a mile longer, that section of Flower Avenue, than the sections of 410 are if you added the pieces up together. However, you can go back and forth in terms of width. Ethan Allen, 410 in general, through the city is a narrower road because there's no parking on either side, whereas Flower Avenue has parking on one side. Flower Avenue is kind of an interesting distinction in terms of right-of-way because State Highway is very clear that they own curb to curb and nothing more, and that the city is responsible for the right-of-way from the curb to the property line on the west side or the city side Flower Avenue, and that Montgomery County is responsible for the right-of-way between the curb and the property boundary on the east side of Flower Avenue. So it's always been a complicated jurisdictional mess on that section of Flower Avenue. How it might impact us, I mean, currently State Highway plows Flower Avenue, and it plows 410. They indicated, I don't know if we did that switch, they would still plow 410 one way or the other, but they may then say we're not plowing Flower Avenue anymore. That wouldn't be that big a deal for us to add Flower Avenue into our cycle. We hit it a little bit in general, but it certainly sometimes, and this past February storm was a good example of it, it was neglected in terms of a highway route because, again, they don't see it as a contiguous piece of highway for them. It's just this little offshoot that's really a lower priority, and that's reflected in their response.
Yeah, Flower Avenue used to be State Highway west of Piney Branch as well, but the county switched it for Great Seneca Highway in the same kind of switch that they're talking about with this. I think one of the things that's, obviously this is a topic because Ethan Allen Avenue is in terrible shape. And it has to be addressed by somebody. I find it interesting that State Highway, really does want to keep 410. They consider it something that is of interest to them. That's why they talk about this swap. Yet they have no interest apparently in doing the repairs anytime soon, for financial reasons.
Yeah, even if we were to make that switch, they've already made it very clear that they have no funds to resurface 410 for at least FY12 and probably FY13. And then what it would do is they would rate it, they would put it in the queue, and it would just come up in balance wherever it did, along with their other, road maintenance projects. We have not evaluated Flower Avenue. I can't really, other than anecdotally, tell you pavement condition is comparable or not or what. I know that Flower Avenue is starting to deteriorate, so it's not at the Ethan Allen stage yet, but it certainly could be. One of the issues that is frustrating for us is in the past, State Highway has definitely treated Ethan Allen as their road. They required utility companies to go through their permit process, not us. And unfortunately, their permit process is not very aggressive. So anytime a utility comes in, it may not look like it, but in the city of Tacoma Park, if a utility comes in, we harass them until they finish putting the permanent patch on. It may take a year and a half, but the effort is there. State Highway does not make any effort to harass the utility companies, and that's one of the reasons why Ethan Allen is in the shape it's in. Interesting thing that we just found out today, actually we have been working for a little while on, Washington Gas is replacing the gas line along Ethan Allen Avenue. In fact, we issued a stop work order to Washington Gas 6 weeks ago because they were out there digging with no permit from us, and they showed us a permit from State Highway, and we all just laughed and slapped a stop work order on them, called our contact at Washington Gas and said, you need a permit in order to work on 410. There is currently a gas line on the south side of Ethan Allen Avenue. They're moving the gas line to the north side of Ethan Allen Avenue. They're making it a smaller, high-pressure line. Interestingly enough, they are going to have to make 15 crossings of Ethan Allen Avenue in order to connect the people on the south side's gas connection to the new high-pressure gas line, which could maybe be a boon for us, because now we've got 15 potential zones of impact. They have been looking at trenching the gas line under the street. They're finding that they might not be able to do that. They have no staging area. They have no room. They're on private property. There's no place to work on Ethan Allen Avenue. So they may have to trench, at which point a condition of our permit would be that you've got to mill and pave the road in that section where those 15 houses are.
Which section is that?
It's pretty much between where Manor Circle comes in, and I don't know if it goes as far as Prince George's or not.
Crossing Jackson and then going down.
Yep. Yeah.
Awesome.
And you can see a little bit now, if you drive down 410, you can see sort of the piles of dirt that they had started. What they're doing is they're locating the house gas connection so they know where they have to go across. They haven't installed the new gas line yet. I'm not sure what their timing is on that, but opens up a bit of an opportunity, and it also reminds me of the loss we have if we now give up control that we didn't know we had on 410. I go back and forth, but I think had we been exercising our authority on Ethan Allen Avenue, it wouldn't be in the shape that it's in currently.
Except that it's pieces of those 410, so that you'd have a nice piece and then junk and then a nice piece.
Well, potentially. I mean, interestingly enough, they have repaved our section of 410 on Philadelphia Avenue up past the library and almost to Park Avenue. That was actually part of a traction report, and there was a traction issue, and so they have a different pot of money that they use to do that in.
And I wondered what traction is, and it's all about the friction of the road surface if it starts to get really slippery. They have a whole division that deals with traction issues.
Because you get sliding cars and rear-end collisions and hydroplaning. I don't think so.
At this point, you just fall into it.
Yeah.
I just had a question. When we say swap, are we actually talking about swapping ownership or responsibility for the road?
My understanding is ownership. Yeah, so it'd be a right-of-way, and with it, the maintenance responsibility that would come with ownership.
And does ownership actually enable, like, does that mean we can do whatever we want on the road? Like, can we put stop signs in at intersections?
We've had some interesting conversations with State Highway.
Actually, we've been having a lot of fun thinking of what we could do on Ethan Allen. I mean, I think that, there's certainly the urge to go out and put speed humps and whatever that, out there as a way to kind of say, okay, we own it, we're going to do this. I think, obviously, we would want to have a very responsible kind of approach to Ethan Allen that would deal better with some of the crossings and that kind of thing that have needed to be improved in that segment.
It also means that the Sycamore Avenue traffic light is on city-owned property, state highway.
That would be an interesting discussion.
You know it well, I bet, right?
Hearing this, is anybody interested in pursuing the swap?
Well, or the larger question is what to do about the conundrum of state
Well,
highway.
look, but the issue is
The
that
presenting
if...
question is, are we interested in the swap?
But the one thing that I think has been brought up before, and I don't know how far it goes, but the stated purpose of keeping Ethan Allen in Philadelphia under city ownership was that it not be expanded and widened.
Yeah, that was the whole reason we
And
owned it.
what happens when a swap happens, and what authority does that give us?
Right.
I think is the issue. I don't know that I foresee a widening of Philadelphia, but I do think that that's a fairly significant part of Tacoma Park's history, that whole issue.
State Highway their response to that was, requests to widen roads come through the county. And if it's on the county's priority list, that gets factored into how State Highway evaluates it. So unless it came down from the county that this was now our priority, it would be the county that would make the decision to widen or would be interested in widening. State Highway, at least per the conversations we've had, doesn't have a care one way or another. The interest would be from the county transportation office if they decided they wanted to widen.
And I don't believe that. I think that's the process that they go through, but if there was some other larger purpose, I think that the state could put a good amount of pressure on that.
Remembering that it could be Prince George's County who would want to widen the piece on the other side of New Hampshire. They expressed a desire to do that, I don't know, 10, 15 years ago.
Well, it is wider.
It is much wider.
Right, but they expressed an interest in widening it even more. Councilmember Clay.
Could we swap maintenance without swapping ownership and therefore keep control of all of the permitting and speed bump and other issues and just make a contractual agreement with them that we will maintain Flower Avenue in exchange for them maintaining Ethan Allen? That's question number one.
Was that discussed with you guys?
I don't have a recollection of that particular angle.
And question number two is, I have a constituent who lives right by I can't remember what address is, it's right next to 215 Ethan Allen, though, the house that was all redone in the, what they call a California style, and I don't, who complains about the impact that the trucks and the vibrations have on her house and her foundation and her structure. It would be interesting, or I think worthwhile, to ask our city attorney the liability question about, is there a liability relationship between the damage that is done to somebody's house because of the use of that as a highway that trucks go on? Is there any liability there, and would it matter who owned the road, who any of that liability then accrued to?
I guess as a follow-up, is there a difference in vibration if the road's well-built versus the way it's
Oh,
in?
sure. I mean, the
I think
problem
that
with
that may be
vibration
part of the
now
issue.
is the potholes and the rough surface. And if you had a smooth surface, you wouldn't have you would have some level of vibration, but not the destructive level of vibration. Interesting enough, the Greenhorn and O'Mara apparently was contracted by the city in '94, I believe, to do a vibration study on some aspect of 410 because of complaints.
Did they do that? Did they do that study?
I've seen references to it in memos. We haven't unearthed the actual work yet, but it was with the former Public Works Director, Mr. Knopf, and we found a little bit of paperwork.
I have one more question. Is there any relationship between money that we get from the state for road maintenance and our ownership of that road? That's my last
Well, in terms of square foot, linear feet, we get a payment based on our linear feet of roadway, which would sort of
And
match
we're
up.
currently getting it for Ethan Allen?
I would assume we are.
No,
The state is
I don't-
very clear on their maps that it's ours.
Actually, I think we are. I think when some of the subject came up some time ago, we made sure to make sure the number, the footage was
Or in
included.
the current case, the money that we aren't getting from the state?
Well,
yeah.
or, the only other thought, Colleen, on that issue of swap maintenance and maintain ownership is that they've also State Highway's gone to great lengths to tell us they have no maintenance money. If it's not federal stimulus dollars, they have no maintenance money. They will not have any maintenance money for the foreseeable future.
Then what's the point? If there's no maintenance money, then I have no interest in swapping. I'd rather put speed bumps in.
Councilmember Schultz.
Lisa, I want to ask if I heard you correctly when you said that if they took complete ownership of Ethan Allen Avenue, all those sections, that notwithstanding their ownership, actual repair work wouldn't really begin until 2, maybe 3 years from now.
At least.
At
Which
least.
we, had,
Which
square-eyed look at each other saying, we all know that can't
That's not
that
tenable.
can't happen.
That road won't exist in 3 years. It'll look like Palmer Lane.
It'll look way worse than Palmer Lane.
Have traffic on the street, I think. is what-
I think one of Daryl's great ideas is that we actually install signs at the entrance on both ends of Ethan Allen there that advise people to drive much slower due to the poor conditions of this state highway. Just right out there. I think that it will be particularly, it's going to be very noticeable when New Hampshire Avenue has been resurfaced and with Carroll Avenue resurfaced on the other end.
And the state can't prevent us from putting the signs out there since we own it.
That's exactly right.
And we do also have cost figures, just so you know the universe of options in terms of maintenance that's included in the memo. We've had our indefinite quantities contractor take a look. He's run a couple of different cost estimates, one where you just go in and kind of triage the worst spaces, excavate, rebuild the base, and put it back together, knowing that other areas would then deteriorate, or just a mill and pave of the whole street, knowing that you're going to have to do some base work. Price works out to about the same. About 30% of the road would need significant excavation. $120,000 is the cost for milling and paving. It would be some additional cost. We're estimating in the ballpark of $25,000 to do more base repair in those areas where the deterioration is so bad, the base of the road has been affected.
If we granted WSSC its permit, how quickly would they,
Washington Gas?
Washington Gas, how quickly would they finish and then have to
Don't know the answers to that, but we should, they're still in discussions with the city arborist and the city engineer, so we should have some better sense of that within a week or so.
because that presumably could reduce that $120,000.
Can I ask one other question? Does it make any sense to de-link the two roads instead of doing a swap? I mean, it seems to me they're never going to do anything with Flower Avenue. It seems like we should just accept it. Just say, okay, we'll take it. And then just keep Ethan Allen under our control, because we're not going to give it anything by letting them take control over it. I mean, does it necessarily need to be a swap? Because, I mean, you were talking about Flower Avenue, and that if we took it over, we would have control from our side of the street to the curb on the other side, except that there is no curb on the other side. It just kind of
Mostly now. Yeah.
sort of turns into...
It's an asphalt humps.
Yeah, the asphalt kind of peters out. It's like a country lane or something, and it keeps
One of the
breaking
things,
up.
I mean, I personally don't recommend a swap. I don't think that's in our interest. One of the things that State Highway has done in the past, not in such severe financial situations, but certainly has done in the past, has agreed to improve a road and turn it over. That's, that they recognize that they can put the money up now and do the improvements and then not do anything more with it in the future. And we've had some sections of Tacoma Avenue and some other places where that's actually been the process that's gone through. So I would think that, we can decide what to do with Flower, but if we would decide we would want it, I would want it to be brought up to good condition.
And perhaps
And
5 or
actually
10 years from
had a
now,
conversation
things will be
with
better.
Mark about this, because many, many years ago, he approached the...
We've had this discussion about Flower Avenue for many years.
Many years.
Yeah.
And that, that was sort of a prominent option, was doing exactly that. The city would take it over. I'd love it if the city took it over, but it costs a lot of money if we have to actually do a lot of repaving. Because what they've done in the city is just, what they've done on Flower is poke a bunch of holes and do these, odd repairs here and there, and I can't imagine that those things will hold up for very long.
And obviously, we've wanted for a long time to see the sidewalks on the county side of the street. And now that most of the big trees that were in the way of the sidewalks are down, I mean, it really is getting to the point where I think it's a doable project. And, you want to have that, it makes sense to do it all at the same time. But that's county-owned, that section.
And Alana had gotten it onto the county
Yeah,
thing,
but then it
and
got
pushed back.
pushed
right.
back far in the CIP.
And just a question about political, have we had conversations with Jamie, Tom, Heather?
I've had I've had several conversations with Heather's office and Heather Mazur's office and Chris Van Hollen's office. This is a particular sore point with Heather Mazur. She wants something done with Ethan Allen. It just drives her nuts. And so we investigated a number of different ways of trying to structure something that didn't really work out. Did manage to have some conversations with Chris Van Hollen's office, and we were going to get a letter and whatever, and then all of a sudden there was a surprise meeting kind of with the new District 3 engineer, which was very disappointing. So it kind of, just the timing of that didn't work out well. But there's strong interest in political pressure. When both Heather's office and Chris Van Hollen's office investigate this, they also find out there's no money. I mean, I think that, there's just not money there. And there was a real push to see, can we do an addendum to the ERA money for the New Hampshire Avenue? And that's not a possibility. Apparently that's a bureaucratic nightmare far worse than any that you can imagine. So we did try to push on a variety of ways. You're going to have the street folks, the construction crew out there right at the intersection. Can they just go up a couple blocks? And I kept trying talk them into different ways of doing that, and it just did not, so far, I don't see that working. It apparently is a brick wall.
Well, and also in terms of State Highways process, there's years of engineering that they would have to do before they would be able to restore that street. That's just their process. They have to do a whole subsurface evaluation and do all kinds of analysis before they would develop the scope of work.
I'm not in favor of the swap.
I'll reiterate my question a few months ago. Is anybody in favor of a swap?
Yeah, I am.
You're outvoted.
Sure. I knew that before you started.
So we're not interested in the swap.
Should we pursue the swap maintenance but not ownership question, or how many ways?
I think it's worth finding out what they would
Ask
say.
some questions.
Collaborating.
I'd be interested in seeing if we could just get Flower Avenue under our control and ownership. Control or ownership.
After they upgrade.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that we're not, we haven't mentioned here, we don't have any money. I mean, I think that that's the other side of this.
And we may have even less.
Right.
Yeah, but we'll have money before the state does.
Don't count on it.
I would
How
not
much money
say
did you
that.
say it would cost to fix Ethan Allen?
$120,000 is the projected cost for a milling and paving. It would take a little bit more than that to repair some base work.
I have to tell you, I think almost everybody in my ward would support taking the money out of the reserve fund to fix Ethan Allen. I can't imagine that other people in the city who travel on it wouldn't feel the exact same way for the amount of money that you're talking about.
It is
I don't know what impact that would have on our ultimate funding, but oh my God, if you could fix this problem for $150,000, why wouldn't you?
Yes, if we could say, we'll take care of our sections of Ethan Allen, you take care of Flower, and everybody will be happy. And then if it ends up we take Flower at the end, then at least they'll have fixed it up for us, and we'll maintain it better.
Sounds like we may not have a simple final answer, but we're a lot clearer than we were. We're adjourned.